Hi everyone, it's Big Z here again from Yes to Chat. Today I have another quick video for you showing you how to fix your Canon lens. Today I took my Canon 7D Mark I camera with 17 to 85mm lens outside in the garden to take some quick shots. But unfortunately, as soon as I wanted to take my first shot, I received an error message. As you can see, it's message 01. Communication between the camera and lens is faulty. Clean the lens contacts. I have cleaned all the contacts between the lens and the camera, but I am still receiving the same message. So I decided to take my camera to the repair shop and paid $88 for an inspection. 2 weeks later, I received a report, and the report was basically saying that there is an issue with the lens and the camera lens diaphragm assembly has to be replaced. I did some research online and found that this is quite common issue for this type of lens, and what actually happens is that the flex cable or ribbon going to the diaphragm assembly usually gets broken. On top of that, they recommended to clean the camera body mirror and also the lens. The total quoted price was 585 Australian dollars. Considering that this lens is almost 10 years old and it's probably not worth more than 500 Australian dollars anyways, I've decided to give it a shot and try to repair the lens myself. To be able to do that, I did have to investigate a little bit more about the issue and what parts I will need to be able to repair the lens. To fix that issue, you can do two things. One, you just buy the ribbon and desolder the ribbon with the diaphragm assembly part. I decided to buy the whole diaphragm assembly because I did not want to do any desoldering. I wasn't confident enough that I wouldn't damage the replacement part. The whole diaphragm assembly cost me 43 Australian dollars delivered. I've already received the part, so let's give it a try and see how we go. Let's first have a look at what we will need today. Our Canon 7D camera, 17 to 85 millimeters lens, toolkit and cleaning kit, and our replacement part, which is the aperture diaphragm assembly. First thing we need to do, we need to remove these 4 screws at the top of the lens. What we do now, we remove these 2 little screws holding the contact points to the silver ring. So we can lift up this silver ring. With this part, we have to be very careful because it only leans open, and we will be looking for these little plastic tabs. It's 4 of them there. Slowly remove those 4 plastic tabs, but be very careful or you might break some, like I did. As you can see, they actually have a little bit of glue on them, which makes it almost impossible to remove them without breaking. I actually broke 3 out of those 4 tabs. And I believe there actually is no way of removing these tabs without breaking them. And for that reason, I had to order a replacement part, which cost me 32 Australian dollars delivered. And you can find Supplier's link in the description. And now push to the side of the contact points and remove the ring. Using a screwdriver or any similar tool, let's remove this zoom rubber ring. Before we can remove this focus and stabilizer unit, we need to disconnect this ribbon holding this unit to the lens board. And now we can remove the manual focus ring as well. There are 5 flex cables connected to the lens board. Be very careful while removing them. These two are a little bit different. You need to lift up these little tabs to release the cable. To be able to release the last ribbon, we need to pull out these little gray tabs on each side of the ribbon. Now the ribbon can be separated from the board. I accidentally split this little gray ribbon holder. Luckily, it hasn't affected the functionality of the lens in the end. There is one screw holding the lens board to the piece underneath. We just need to remove this screw. Now we can lift up the lens board. Our next step will be removing these 5 little screws. Now we can slowly remove this plastic ring and get access to the parts underneath. When we are done, we can remove these 3 little screws and cylinders on the side of the lens. Underneath this black tape, there is a zoom contact brush. Use screwdriver or any similar tool to remove this black tape. As you can see, there is one screw holding the contact brush to the lens. Use your screwdriver again and make a little mark like I did. Now unscrew the screw and remove the contact brush. This mark we made will help us when placing the contact brush back. Now we can remove the remaining 3 screws on top of the lens. Now we can separate the focus ring from the lens. When assembling the lens back, we have to make sure that this little focus ring fork sits perfectly on this part of the lens. Now, as you can see, there are 3 sealed screws. We need to remove the seal and unscrew the screws. Also, remove these two screws holding the zoom stopper. This allows us to remove also the zoom ring. Now carefully separate the zoom mechanism from the lens. Before we can access the aperture diaphragm assembly, we have to remove these three screws. This silver ring. And all 9 screws, including the white plastic bits, holding the whole mechanism together. And here we have our aperture diaphragm assembly. As you can see, the flex cable on my original diaphragm assembly is detached. And here you can see where exactly the flex cable snapped. Before we proceed to our next step, let's have a look at these 3 little metal bits. We don't actually have to remove these, but let's mark the spot where they belong, just in case they fall out. It's not difficult to put them back. We just have to make sure they are positioned the right way. Now we can remove the remaining part of the snapped cable. We need to remove this flex cable support from the original diaphragm assembly and install it on our replacement part. We need to do the same with the flex cable support from the other end of the cable. In case you only purchased the replacement cable, now it's time to do the desoldering. As I purchased the whole diaphragm assembly, I can now proceed with the next step. By placing the original flex cable next to our replacement part, we can make a mark in the exact spot where the original flex cable is bent. Now we can fold our replacement flex cable to match the original flex cable. As you can see, the replacement part already comes with 2 required sticky tapes. These 2 little pins will sit in these 2 holes when putting back the flex cable support. The middle hole is for the screw. This part of the flex cable support needs to slide in the diaphragm assembly until we hear the little click. After that, we can put the screw back in and use the provided sticky tape to fix the cable to the flex cable support. For the other flex cable support, use your screwdriver and open it a little bit. Now we can install this on our replacement diaphragm assembly part. Once all fixed, fold the flex cable again right in the middle of these two flex cable supports. Before we start reassembling the lens, we need to first clean the glass of the diaphragm assembly. Now we can start reassembling the lens. Make sure that the square part of this cylinder comes on top of the flex cable. Now it's time to install back these little white plastic bits. When you look closely, you'll see that one side is actually thinner than the other side. This thinner side needs to go in our cylinder. The other side is where the screws go. If needed, use your tools for a better alignment of these two parts. Make sure that all these little bits are pushed in properly. Now we can screw all the screws back in. Including the screw fixing the flex cable support to the cylinder. This silver ring can also go back in now. We have to make sure we install this ring the right way. The holes for screws in the silver ring have to match the holes in the cylinder, and at the same time these two grooves have to match. In our next step, we'll be fixing the silver ring to the cylinder. Before we keep going, let's clean these parts of the lens as well. For this step, it's essential to keep this screw, flex cable, and zoom lens driver in the same line. Keep adjusting these two parts until they are all in the same line, as you can see here. There are two different shapes in this part of the lens. This zoom lens driver needs to go in this square box. Now dismantle the lens again. Place these two parts together. And screw the mechanism back in. Again, make sure that the flex cable, zoom lens driver and the screw are in the same line. Now we can fix these two parts together with the screws. Also, in this case, it's important to keep the flex cable, this new screw and the zoom driver in the same line. Screw all three screws back in. And test the mechanism. The movement needs to be nice and smooth. Now we can place the stopper back in as well. When placing the zoom ring back in, make sure that the scale on this zoom ring matches the square part of the lens. Here it's placed incorrectly, so we need to adjust to place it the right way. Using the nail polish, we can seal these three screws to prevent them from moving. Now it's time to place the focus part back in as well. Make sure that this fork sits perfectly on the focus ring driver. These two marks also have to match. This indicates that we are placing these two parts together correctly. Don't push too much. If you are not certain if they sit on top of each other perfectly, just check the bottom of the lens if there is any gap. No gap here indicates that these two parts sit on top of each other perfectly. As you can see, there is still a little gap between these two parts here. Carefully push the zoom ring on the right hand side against the focus ring on the left hand side until you hear a little click. This will eliminate the gap between these two parts. Now we can keep going with our 3 zoom ring screws. And these 3 screws on top of the lens. Once finished, we can test the lens again. To place the contact brush back in, we'll use our mark we made previously when dismantling the lens. After that, we can cover it with the tape and put the rubber ring back as well. The focus ring can go back in now as well. Make sure you put it back the right way. It needs to slide in perfectly. Now it's time to put back the next part. These holes need to match the flex cables on the lens. All remaining screws can go back in now. Here you can see how the zoom mechanism works. Every time you use the lens zoom, the flex cable moves up and down. This puts tremendous pressure on this cable, and after some time of using it, it may get damaged. That's why it's important to be careful while using your lens. Now it's time to place back the zoom board and install all the flex cables. The zoom stabilizer ring as well as the flex cable can also go back in. Next is our silver ring with 3 holes. 2 holes are for screws and this middle hole is for this little pin on the lens contacts. We start by placing this silver ring back on the top of the lens and fixing it with our 4 screws. Then we can click the zoom contacts back in. And fix to the silver ring with our last 2 screws. Now it's a good time to clean the lens before we place our last part back in. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, when I was removing this part, I actually snapped 3 out of those 4 little tabs on this part. Before I receive my replacement part, I am still going to place this back and test the lens. This shouldn't have any effect on the functionality of the lens. And now I can do my last check. I can test the functionality of the zoom and focus ring. And I can also double check for any possible dust on the lens. Before we place our lens back on the camera, we should also double check if there is any dust on our camera body mirror. And that's all, guys. The last thing we have to do is to test the camera and see if we were successful. No error message received. Autofocus working as well, so I am quite happy with the result. So let's summarize it, guys. For 2 replacement parts needed to fix this lens, I paid $65 plus $88 for the initial inspection. If I did go through the repairman shop, I would pay $88 for the initial inspection plus 585 Australian dollars to fix the lens and to clean the camera. So I've saved almost $500, which I believe it's not a bad result. I hope you find this video helpful and please let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you next time.